Ladies and gentlemen, history is filled with epic battles: Normandy, Iwo Jima, the skies over Britain. But some conflicts slip through the cracks of time, overshadowed by larger wars. This is the story of the Forgotten War, a bizarre clash in the Pacific where elite US paratroopers were pitted against an unlikely foe, the giant African snail. A war not of bullets and bombs, but of slime, shells, and sheer determination. During World War II, as Allied forces battled Japanese troops across the Pacific, a silent invasion was underway. The giant African land snail, scientifically known as Lysicatna fulica, was introduced to several South Pacific islands as a food source. Originally from East Africa, these mollusks can grow up to 8 inches long, with shells as tough as tank armor, and an appetite that devours crops, gardens, and even stucco from buildings. The snails were brought in by military forces, first by the Japanese in places like the Mariana Islands for their troops to eat, and later colonies were even introduced as a food reserve for American soldiers. But war has a way of unleashing unintended consequences. As battles raged, these snails escaped captivity, multiplying rapidly in the humid tropical climate. With no natural predators, their populations exploded. By the war's end in 1945, islands like Guam and Saipan were overrun. Crops were decimated, native plants choked out, and the snails carried parasites that threatened human health, including the rat lungworm, which can cause meningitis. I remember Guam after the liberation. You'd walk at night and hear that crunch, giant snails everywhere. They were like landmines, but slimmer. We called them the enemy's last stand. The Forgotten War truly began in the post-WWII era, as the US military administered these newly liberated territories. The snails weren't just a nuisance. They were an ecological disaster, threatening food security for islanders and US bases. Enter the Paratroopers, elite airborne units stationed in the Pacific, fresh from combat jumps in places like the Philippines. Units like the 11th Airborne Division, who had fought in Luzon, were redeployed for unconventional warfare. Why paratroopers? Their mobility and training in rugged terrain made them ideal for sweeping dense jungles and remote areas where snails thrived. In 1946, Operation Shell Shock, a classified effort, saw paratroopers from the 503rd and 511th Regimental Combat Teams parachuting into infested zones on Guam and other islands, dropping from C-47s at low altitude. They'd land in clearings, then fan out with flamethrowers, salt sprayers, and even experimental chemical baits. Contact. Snail at 12 o'clock. Deploy the salt grenade. The tactics were unorthodox. Paratroopers used bayonets to prise nails from trees, boots to crush them underfoot, and backpack sprayers filled with copper sulfate emulsicide. Night patrols were the worst. Snails emerged in the rain, covering paths in a slippery horde. One veteran recalled a snail ambush, where a platoon slipped on a trail of slime, tumbling into a ravine. Casualties. Mostly bruised egos and ruined uniforms. But the enemy was resilient. Giant snails lay up to 1,200 eggs a year, hiding in soil and foliage. Paratroopers adapted, using dogs to sniff out clusters and even enlisting local islanders in snail hunts. In one infamous incident on Saipan, a drop zone was overrun before the jump, forcing paratroopers to clear it by hand, literally salting the earth. The war dragged on into the 1950s, blending with Cold War tensions. The US government tried biological controls, introducing predatory rosy wolf snails from Florida, but this backfired spectacularly. The predators ignored the giants and decimated native snail species, leading to extinctions. Paratroopers, meanwhile, logged thousands of kills, but the snails persisted, spreading to Hawaii and beyond. This wasn't glamorous like storming beaches, but it was vital. The paratroopers' fight against the snails symbolized the hidden costs of war, ecological fallout that lingers for generations. By the 1960s, chemical pesticides and community efforts turned the tide, but the giant African snail remains a threat today. Intercepted at US borders, the paratroopers' role faded into obscurity, a footnote in military history. Yet their story reminds us, heroes come in all forms, and sometimes the greatest battles are against the smallest enemies. This has been the Forgotten War. Thank you for watching.